the United States have killed the leader of ISIS, the leader of Daesh. It's the second time, right? You might recall Donald Trump took out Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and now they've taken out his successor. Now, there are a couple of things I want to go through with you. So just here's a headline from yesterday. ISIS leader killed in U.S. raid. And the propaganda effort is substantial because they're all celebrating the fact that, oh, the ISIS leader has been killed. But what they're not telling you is that they also killed, so 13 people killed in total, 6 of them children, 4 of them women. So the breaking, President Biden said in a brief statement on Thursday that Abu Ibrahim al-Hashimi al-Qurayshi, the current leader of ISIS, was taken off the battlefield. And then, of course, the New York Times, raid targeting ISIS leader came after months of planning. You know, they got to do the whole voodoo and be like, oh, this was really complicated, and it was a precision surgical strike, and there was lots of big brain, galaxy brain efforts behind this, and it was so good and so American, and no one else can do this, and we're the best, and we took this bad guy out. Remember, it's the whole neoconservative narrative. You got to have the good guys and the bad guys, right? And America is always the good guys, and everyone else is the bad guys. Now, I'm not going to argue with you. If you're going to talk about bad guys, ISIS are certainly there. But it's much more nuanced than that, right? Because what they try to do is do this pro-war propaganda that there are no civilians being killed, right? It's just the bad guys.
He was responsible for the recent brutal attack on a prison in northeast Syria holding ISIS fighters, which was swiftly addressed by our brave partners in the Syrian Democratic Forces. He was the driving force behind the genocide of the Yazidi people in northwestern Iraq in 2014. We all remember the gut-wrenching stories, mass slaughters that wiped out entire villages, thousands of women and young girls sold into slavery, rape used as a weapon of war. And thanks to the bravery of our troops, this horrible terrorist leader is no more. Our forces carried out the operation with their signature preparation and precision, and I directed the Department of Defense to take every precaution possible to minimize civilian casualties. Knowing that this terrorist had chosen to surround himself with families, including children, we made a choice to pursue a special forces raid at a much greater risk than to our own people, rather than targeting him with an airstrike. We made this choice to minimize civilian casualties. Our team is still compiling the report, but we do know that as our troops approach to capture the terrorist, in a final act of desperate cowardness, he, with no regard to the lives of his own family or others in the building, he chose to blow himself up, not just to the vest, but to blow up that third floor.
Okay, so you got what Biden is saying? He's saying that the guy blew himself up. And that's how the civilians were killed. That's what they're saying. Okay, so apparently he just woke up with a suicide vest on him every he gets up every day and he puts on a suicide vest just in case there's going to be. But he's not saying that. Not a vest. He's saying the whole floor was blown up. What does that mean? He had C4 under the carpet or in the couch? What is that? The whole floor was blown up. From the Washington Post, okay? And she says that aboard Air Force One, because you know Air Force One is the presidential jet, the private jet of the United States president, and they have a room, they'll let the journalists on board with them. And so she's saying aboard Air Force One, a reporter asked White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki for evidence to back up the claim that Qurayshi detonated a suicide bomb. Psaki asked whether skeptics think the U.S. military is, quote, not providing accurate information, and ISIS is providing accurate information. The reporter did not back down. But I mean, the U.S. has not always been straightforward about what happens with civilians, she said. And I mean, that is a fact. That is a fact. That is an absolute truth. And we'll get to that in a second. And then Jen Psaki, so the White House spokesperson, she responded on Twitter and she said, context here is pretty important. I answered with below, which you did not include. And then she says, so this is a transcript from what Psaki said on the plane in response to this question of, did Qurayshi actually blow himself up? And she said, well, as you know, there's an extensive process that the Department of Defense undergoes, the president made clear from the beginning, at every point in this process, that doing everything possible to avoid civilian casualties was his priority and preference. Yeah, but that doesn't mean anything. She's just saying that Joe Biden wanted to avoid civilian casualties, allegedly. Yeah, but you're not answering the question, did the guy blow himself up or not? How did those children, the women, how did these civilians die? And so, if you guys recall, in August, when the U.S. was leaving Afghanistan, or let's say withdrawing the bulk of their troops, the CIA is still hanging around there. But back in August, after this attack on Kabul airport, Biden carried out a drone strike on ISIS-K, right? And for weeks, they lied about it. They lied and they said, no, there were no civilian deaths. We didn't know of any civilian deaths. And that's it. It was just ISIS-K and you know, they're terrorists and we got them. And then, of course, the mainstream media for once did their job and actually called out the Biden administration, and they did an investigation and said, no, that's not true. You killed a bunch of civilians. Only civilians. You didn't kill anyone from ISIS. The guy that they were following all day was an aid worker. He and his family even had a visa to go to the United States. Correct me if I'm wrong. In any case, he was completely innocent. He had nothing to do with ISIS. And this is what's funny, because they were tracking him all day, right, with drones, and saying that, you know, he was like he was handling explosives, which turned out to be buckets of water, and they can see like explosives from a drone all the way in the air, but they can't see the children that were next to him when they blew him up. So they murdered an entire family, the Ahmadi family, and covered it up. So why would you trust the Biden administration not to lie about this now? It's not even just Biden. It's every administration. George Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, they all kill civilians and lie about it. Why do you think Daniel Hale is in prison? Because he blew the whistle on the U.S. Air Force, you know, just obliterating civilians. And during a period of a couple of months, 90% of the people that were killed in U.S. drone strikes were civilians. They know this. And I've reported on this as well, how in Pakistan and Afghanistan, they would go after someone who's from the Taliban or the Pakistani Taliban, and they would, every time they would think that they got this guy, and then turns out they just blew up tons of civilians. Even at a funeral, they even drone striked a funeral of someone that had been previously killed in a drone strike. Like it's leagues of evil and depravity. It's unbelievable. And so now, you know, they're saying that they've killed this ISIS leader, and they're trying to cover up the fact that they murdered these civilians. I don't know that this guy actually blew himself up. They don't have any proof. They don't have any proof of this. We're just supposed to take their word for it, like the other times when they were caught lying. So look at this also. Look at the propaganda. You know, it's just, they post a picture. The White House Twitter account posts a picture saying President Biden, Vice President Harris, and members of the president's national security team observed the counterterrorism operation responsible for removing from the battlefield Abu Ibrahim al-Hashimi al-Qurayshi, the leader of ISIS. And there's, you know, Biden is doing this very, you know, giving the strong stare, and they all have this concerned look on their faces, like, what? You just blew up a bunch of civilians. What's so brave about that? This is just, it's literally just pro-war propaganda. And I think Glenn puts it quite succinctly, Glenn Greenwald. He says, these kinds of staged photos are intended to be pornographic and stimulate this kind of arousal. That more women and children were killed than anyone else doesn't at all dampen the excitement. If anything, it intensifies the high. Absolutely true. I couldn't have put it better myself. This is exactly what it is. It's pro-war pornography. And, you know, they think that they're brave and they're doing some kind of a huge favor to the world, and it's disgusting. Honestly, it's disgusting. Here is where he was killed. Where this raid took place, right? So in Atma, which is, interestingly enough, in northern Syria on the border with Turkey. Okay, I think this tweet narrows it down quite succinctly. Says the house where the leader of ISIS was killed by the raid is located in a security square in northern Syria. It's 150 to 200 meters from a checkpoint for Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, also known as HTS, is Al-Qaeda, basically. 400 to 500 meters from a Turkish police station and around 1 kilometer from a Turkish military post. Now, why is this so significant? What does this mean, that he's in northern Syria on the Turkish border? Like, what does that mean? We know what it means geographically. What does it mean politically? What does it mean about what he's doing there? Well, the entire war, during the war on Syria, they've been pushing this narrative, the mainstream media, that no, there are moderate rebels. You do have people who are opposing the Syrian government, who are not from ISIS, who are not from Al-Qaeda. They're moderate rebels, and these are the ones that we must give weapons to and training and logistical support, and they did, right? The British, the Americans, they've given these moderate rebels everything. And right now, the Syrian government has taken back most of the land in Syria, right? But one place that is not under control of the Syrian Arab army, and which is under the control of these moderate rebels, is Idlib. So Idlib is a governorate, basically a province in Syria, and it's also a city, right, in Idlib. So this whole province is under control of Turkey, which is a NATO member, and these militias like Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, which is Al-Qaeda. You know, it was Al-Qaeda, and then they changed it to Al-Nusra, and then to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. You can rebrand it as many times as you like. It's still Al-Qaeda. And so, like I said, HTS is there, but in the media, they don't tell you that. They tell you that this is a rebel stronghold. Yeah, but what kind of rebel? So you're telling us that there are moderate rebels, and they're not like Al-Qaeda, and they're not like ISIS. But every time that you kill an ISIS leader, he's exactly where these moderate rebels are. Why would he be there if these groups are in opposition to each other? Why are the moderate rebels giving amnesty and hiding these ISIS leaders if they have nothing to do with each other? Because when they killed Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, they killed him in Idlib. And right now, this guy, they also killed him in Idlib. Isn't that weird? Isn't that weird? What a coincidence. Out of all of Syria, throughout the whole country, and even Iraq, because he's Iraqi, remember? Qurayshi. And he's just so happens to be exactly where these moderate rebels are. Oh, wow, you guys are funny. Again, let me just show you this article from Al Jazeera. 6 children and 4 women among 13 people killed as U.S. Special Operations Forces launched a raid in Idlib province, first responders say. And that's what they're not telling you, right? So this is, again, very interestingly enough, this is the exact same story they said about Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, right? When he was killed by Trump. They also said that he blew himself up at the last second. And now they're saying the same story and he blew himself up. Yeah, but you expect us to trust you? We have no way of verifying that at all. You might as well, they could have easily blown all of these civilians to bits, and now they're just pinning it on him, right? Like how can we actually verify that? The reporters on Air Force One are asking them, like, is this true? And their response is, well, maybe you just trust ISIS too much. Like, that's the response. Reporters are asking the White House, is it true that this ISIS leader blew himself up? And the White House response is like, what, you trust ISIS over us? Just answer the question. Like, no one, that doesn't mean you support ISIS. It just give us the truth. But they can't do that, of course, right? They can't do that. Because if you question the official U.S. narrative, then you are a Russian agent and you are an ISIS supporter, you are a supporter of Saddam Hussein, you're a Putin puppet, an Assadist, etc., etc., etc. A whole load of diarrhea, right? But not the truth. They're not interested in giving you the truth. And so, once again, you see how in Idlib, so like I said, most of Syria has been taken back by the Syrian Arab army. Of course, the Golan Heights are still occupied by Israel since 67. Everything here in Hasake and Deir ez-Zor, so northeastern Syria, is occupied by the United States and the Kurds. And then here you have Idlib, which is under control of Turkey, and those other jihadist militias, the Takfiri terrorists that are backed by Turkey. And of course, you have two groups, for example, Faylaq al-Rahman and Jaish al-Islam. These were in Damascus. They used to be a couple of meters from where my cousin lives in Jobar. And they found themselves all the way in Idlib, right? Because when the Syrian government would defeat the terrorists in a battle, they would ship them off in these green buses to Idlib, right? So you put down your arms, you get to live, and you go to Idlib. And now you have 20,000, 30,000 jihadist fighters there. 5,000 of them are actually Uyghurs, right? So again, apparently these are Syrians. They want you to believe that it's a civil war, but you have thousands of people from China who are in Idlib. You have thousands of people from Tunisia, from God knows where, all over the world, who are coming in and trying to overthrow the Syrian government. But yeah, apparently it's a civil war. So, and it's an uprising of the Syrian people, right? They try to frame it as if like the entire Syrian people is on opposition. So I also want to point another thing out to you. Do you know how they always say that, like, what is one of the biggest things you hear about Russia and about Syria in the news? What do they always tell you about Bashar al-Assad? They say he's bombing civilians, right? They say that Russia and Syria are bombing hospitals. They're using barrel bombs. They just kill people indiscriminately, right? That's the whole argument right now about how the counterterrorism is being waged. That's the biggest thing you hear. Oh my God, the Russian Air Force bombed this hospital, right? The Syrians are using helicopters and dropping barrel bombs. The whole point of that is what? Is that they're accusing Syria and Russia of killing civilians indiscriminately while they're fighting terrorists. But apparently, when the United States kills civilians indiscriminately while fighting terrorists, it's okay. Apparently that's okay, right? As long as you wear an American flag when you're killing Syrian civilians, then it's okay. And apparently it's your business to be in Syria, even though it's not your country. But the Syrian army in Syria, in its own country, fighting foreign terrorists, is not allowed. That's not allowed. And that's that makes you a war criminal and all sorts of things. But that standard doesn't apply to the US for some reason, right? They can kill civilians all over the planet. It's not just Syria. This is the whole war on terror, right? They've always done this. They always kill tons and tons and tons of civilians in the name of fighting terrorism, and that's how they justify it, right? The ends justify the means. They could say, well, we're just getting the bad guys, so you can't hate us for killing all the civilians. It was collateral. Wow. So once again, you have dead Syrians, and again, like I don't even keep in mind. I have no clue who these people are. I don't know their names. I don't even know if they're related to the Qurayshi as they're saying, as they're claiming. I'm not interested in that. That's not my point. The point is that the United States is coming to the other side of the planet and killing Syrian civilians, and then claiming that it's just collateral, it's acceptable. And as a matter of fact, they're not even talking about it, right? They're saying it's his fault, Qurayshi's fault, that he blew himself up. I mean, you could even look at it as some people might look at it as a cause and effect. Like if you hadn't done this raid, he wouldn't have blown himself up. I don't know if I buy this story. The rational thing is not to believe the U.S. government, because they have a giant track record of lying about civilian deaths under every administration. So why would you trust them? And this is not even something that just dates back to the war on terror. Look at Vietnam. Look at what they were doing in Vietnam. Look at what they did in North Korea. I don't know if most Americans know this. I don't know if most people who are watching right now know this. When the United States was in Korea, it killed 20% of the population. 20% of the population in 3 years. They ran out of targets to bomb. They bombed everything. So don't come here and tell me that the U.S. doesn't bomb indiscriminately and they have surgical strikes. This has been proven to be a complete myth. There's no such thing as surgical strikes. Half the time they don't even know what they're firing at. How many times have they've killed a terrorist in Pakistan and then it turns out he's still alive? The interior minister in the new Taliban government in Afghanistan he was reported to have been killed by the Americans several times. Well, he's obviously not dead, so who were they killing? Definitely not terrorists. So this angers me. And then, they come in and act like that that the U.S. is somehow justified in doing this. Dude, the terrorists that the United States kills are usually working for the United States, right? When they went into Afghanistan to get bin Laden used to be one of their buddies, right? They used to give him money, and they gave money to his to Zawahiri, right? All of these mujahideen who later went on, in Peshawar and in Pakistan and Afghanistan to form al-Qaeda. Many of them were on the payroll of Uncle Sam at one point. And interestingly enough, I'll tell you another thing. When we talk about this ISIS leader being killed, so Qurayshi and Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, let me tell you an interesting fact. Both of these guys were in U.S. detention at one point. So there's a camp in Iraq called Camp Buka, and this is where the U.S. used to detain all of these al-Qaeda fighters, and it basically ended up being a breeding ground for ISIS, right? So you had, like I said, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who was the former leader of ISIS, which Trump killed. He was in there. If I'm not mistaken, Zarqawi was in there as well. But we're talking about ISIS. So Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and also the guy they killed yesterday, Qurayshi. So I don't know what was going on there. If I didn't know any better, I would say that at best, that was a cataclysmic failure, because they detained these guys and just turned them into a next generation of terrorists. And at worst, if I didn't know better, again, I'm just speculating, but I think I have good reason to speculate this given the U.S. history, I would say they were on Uncle Sam's payroll. And that's not a far-fetched thing at all, because bin Laden himself, al-Qaeda, all of these people who were instrumental in forming al-Qaeda, they were on Uncle Sam's payroll at one point. And the United States has a habit of doing this. It's very much like the mob. So, they'll buddy up with someone and use them to advance their agenda. And once they're done with them, they'll finish them off, right? So once they're done using them, they'll kill them. It's just like the mafia. The United States, they gave Saddam Hussein chemical weapons, right, to use against Iran. They used him to attack Iran. And then, once they had no more use for him, you saw what they did to Saddam Hussein. They invaded Iraq. They everything. They ruined it. Twice, right? The Kurds. The United States is partnered up with the Kurds in Syria, claiming like, yeah, we support you and you're our allies and all of this stuff. But you saw what Trump did. He pulled out of northern Syria. He's still he pulled out is the wrong term. He basically reshuffled the troops inside Syria. He moved them from northern Syria to northeastern Syria to the oil fields. And still with the Kurds, but you had all these people in Congress saying, oh my God, how can you leave Syria? You need to keep occupying that country because of our allies, the Kurds. Well, obviously, that didn't matter so much, right? So you might be friends with the United States one day, the next you're not going to be. Because when they have no more use for you, they screw you. And same thing with the Mujahideen, with al-Qaeda. Once they were done using them to fight the Soviets, they turned their sights on them. So you see, the United States has a history of doing this kind of stuff. It doesn't have, allies. It has interests, I think, as Kissinger said. But again, I'm just speculating here. At the end of the day, what I will say, though, is the United States invaded Iraq. It destabilized Syria, and it created a power vacuum. If the United States hadn't invaded Iraq and gotten rid of Saddam, we wouldn't have ISIS. ISIS would not exist. That doesn't mean Saddam Hussein is a saint. It means that the United States does more harm than it does good, right? So as a result of destabilizing Syria, it spilled over into there as well. And when the United States says, oh, we're going to go and kill the ISIS leader, you created ISIS. You fucking created that. And this is how the United States keeps the money coming in for the weapons manufacturers. They create the same terrorists which they later on fight. And that's why they can keep perpetual war happening and perpetual profits, right? It's an endless war. It's like the war on drugs, the war on terror. It's just endless. And the profits are endless too. These companies make trillions, from bullets to boots to tanks, you name it. There's tons and tons and tons of money being made. So these people, they don't care about the destruction that it does to Syria. They don't care about the civilians they killed. They always have an excuse, right? There's always an excuse to go bomb a country, to kill the civilians, and it's always justified. You know, the United States can never do any wrong. It's always right. And if you question that, you're an ISIS supporter, you're a Saddam supporter, you're an Assad supporter, yada, 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 right? Uncle Sam is always right, and anyone who opposes Uncle Sam is always wrong. That's it. Shut your mouth. So that's the game. That's the game that they play here. They use these terrorists, they create these terrorist groups, or they give rise to the conditions that create these terrorist groups to help advance their foreign policy, their imperialism. And then once they move forward, they get rid of them, right? They tie up loose ends, as the mob would say. And so I'm not very impressed by this raid. They'll just find another leader for ISIS. Maybe in the future, it's better not to invade the Middle East and give rise to groups like ISIS in the first place. If you really want to fight terrorism, why would you destabilize countries and allow terrorists to flourish? You're obviously not interested in fighting terrorism if you're helping create those terrorists. You're obviously not interested in terrorism when you're fucking financing al-Qaeda and all of these other offshoots, these 50 flavors of jihad inside Syria. We know that the US and its allies are funding these terrorist groups. It's a fucking fact. Not just funding them, sending them weapons, all kinds of support. It's a fact. They're not interested in fighting terrorism. That's bullshit. But my point is that this is not going to fix any terrorism issues because they're just going to find another one to replace him. And this allows the United States to keep going with this perpetual war. Oh, look, there's this other guy. Now we got to go in and kill him. Oh, it's not him. We blew up 50 civilians. Doesn't matter. We'll go get him next time. And it goes on and on. Just look at what happened in Afghanistan. Look at what happened in Pakistan. Look at these raids by Task Force 9, right? This secret unit that bypasses all kinds of safeguards. They just pretend they're under fire. They pretend it's self-defense. And then they just blow up civilians. So the definition of a terrorist, it doesn't even mean anything because you have these U.S. troops, these units, not just U.S. ones, Australian, British, SAS were doing this as well. They go into Afghanistan, they go into Syria, they go into Iraq, and they claim they're under fire. They make it up. They make it all up. They even plant weapons on bodies to justify executing people. It's a sick, vile culture. And it has nothing to do with security. It has nothing to do with fighting terrorism. That is terrorism. If you ask me, what the United States is doing, what the United Kingdom is doing, what Australia are doing to the world, when they invade Afghanistan or when they're going into Syria or Iraq, that is terrorism. It's state terrorism. When you kill millions of people and you displace millions of people, that's terrorism. Another dead, obscure terrorist leader. Time to start 2 stopwatches. The first counts down how long until the official story about the operation turns out to be bullshit. The second, shorter clock, is the time it takes to generate a new obscure leader of the terrorist group. And that's exactly it, right? Before you know it, they'll have some other Abu something, pretending to be a caliph, and then they'll go in and kill him and kill a bunch of civilians, and it just keeps going, right? They think they can justify it that way. And of course, it's just like Zero Dark 30, that film about killing bin Laden. They fetishize it. They make this these acts of war, of murder, into some sort of myth to sell to the public, right? And it's so disgusting. I mean, again, we're not going to pity Osama bin Laden and these creatures from ISIS, but my point is that what the Americans are doing is that they try to sell this pro-war propaganda, right? They'll make movies out of it. Go look at the comment section on Twitter under Biden's tweet that, oh, we got this guy from ISIS. It's unbelievable, right? There's like the people there have no clue that there are civilians who've been killed. And they're just like, oh, God bless America. God bless you. Thank you so much for protecting our freedom. What the fuck are you talking about? What freedom? What business do you have in Syria? What a sick situation, honestly. So disgusting. And then, like I said, the press will sell it for them. Oh, this took months of planning. It was so brave. There's nothing brave about that. Biden calls it brave, our brave service men and women. You're not serving anyone except Raytheon. You're not serving anyone except the CIA. There's nothing brave about killing a bunch of civilians, even if you tell yourself that, oh, it's a terrorist that we got. No, you're the terrorist at this point. There's no difference between you and the target. It's really upsetting. It's really upsetting seeing how the disregard for human life. And like I talked about the other day, how they bombed this dam in Syria. They used one of the biggest bombs they have in the military to bomb civilian infrastructure, which is a war crime. They almost killed, again, if that dam had overflowed, if the bomb wasn't a dud, it was a dud. It didn't go off. If it had gone off, more Syrians would have been killed than in the entire war put together. This is the kind of recklessness that they perpetuate, and then that they perpetrate, and then they have the nerves to accuse Russia and Syria of being indiscriminate. Unbelievable hypocrisy.